it's great that you all are interested in oracy. I've been working on spoken language, and especially spoken language in education, all of my academic career. But now I know it's called oracy. And that word is now in the public discourse, as they say. It's being used quite a bit. And perhaps one reason that you're interested in it is because it is being used a bit more. The word itself was, in fact, a neologism, as they say. It was invented by Andrew Wilkinson, who was a professor at UEA back in the 60s. I met him once when I was a postgrad, and he invented the word because he thought that spoken language didn't get enough attention in education. And that was partly because you had to use words like talk or speaking and listening or spoken communications. Well, you know, for reading and writing, you've got literacy. And for using numbers, you've got numeracy. So he invented a word that looked like them. And the idea was to help get spoken language a bit more attention in education. And it's worked eventually. It kind of came into fashion a bit in the 80s when there was a national oracy project. But then Back to Basics governments came in and they said, oh no, let's get back to teaching them long division. So anyway, that's the origins of the word. So why does it matter? Well, it matters really because spoken language skills, as Wilkinson said, they've never really been given any priority in school. It's been sort of assumed that we just pick up how we learn to speak. We just do it, you know, and that's it. We also know from lots of surveys that not just young people, but most people feel trepidation when they're asked to speak in public. And I did, certainly. I remember when I was in the sixth form school, I actually pretended to be ill one day because I was meant to read the lesson out in the assembly, and I just wasn't going to do it. And we know that this is the case. And there are things we need to do. When journalists talk to me about oracy, as I've done quite a bit recently, with the Labour Party focusing on it, they think that means doing things like I'm doing now and having debates. Well, it does, but it doesn't just mean that. It means doing things like that with spoken language, which are at least as important and perhaps more. And I'll say a bit more about that. We all need to know how to do that. Also, from my own research and other research done at Cambridge and elsewhere, even some at the other place, we know that language development is really closely related to children's cognitive development. We know that if they have a language-poor preschool experience, they're still doing worse at school when they're 13 or 14. And the pandemic has added to that. We had a big project that just ended fairly recently in Birmingham with early years teachers. And they said that with the lockdown, some kids have been at home and the parents have been at home. And so the dad's read stories, played with them. The mum's been around too, played with them, done some homeschooling. And these kids, 5-year-olds coming to school, are talking like 7-year-olds. There's other kids who it seems like for 18 months have been stuck in front of a screen and left to their own devices. And they're talking like 3-year-olds. So in one class, you've actually got a disparity which just wasn't the case in the past. You always had some, but it's worse. And this means it's got implications for their learning as well as for their communication. So that's what we know. The other thing, for any of you at education background, this is the other thing. Talk is the main tool, isn't it, of our trade if you're a teacher. And it makes things happen. If I just stop now, this as an educational event would stop. And the same applies to most classrooms. Even if other means of communication are being used, talk still is the motor for most classroom education. Now here at Cambridge, I was a member of the Faculty of Education. I should have said, I'm now based here at Hughes Hall, and I'm the director of the centre called Oracy Cambridge. But in the Faculty of Education, where we train the teachers, we teach them how to use talk to teach. Now, I'm not convinced that everywhere in the country does that. And it'd be interesting to know if you are a teacher in your background, were you expressly taught how to use talk and how to organise it in the classroom? That's why I won't say a lot about that today because I've not got that much time, but that's one of the vital parts of what we do. So there are three aspects of Oracy really, which I think it helps to think about. The most obvious one is learning how to talk, how to use spoken language better, and listening, how to use those more effectively. The other one is learning through talk, which is what I've just been mentioning. How well is talk being used in classrooms to enable students to learn any subject, maths, science, history, PE, whatever. And the other one is, how much do children in school and older students find out about talk? You know, they learn a lot about maths, they learn a lot about literature usually, and the world through geography. But how much do they actually learn about spoken language? It's not really figuring. It's kind of taken for granted again. So these are the three things that we, through the Centre Oracy Cambridge, are trying to promote. And what we do is mainly we work with teachers, not just in the UK, but in the rest of the world as well. And we provide professional development for teachers. We're one of the main providers of it, along with this charity called Voice 21, who we work with very closely. And there's a massive interest amongst teachers in using talk more effectively and helping their students develop their speaking and listening skills. As I said, one reason that Oracy is in the public eye is because this fella has mentioned it recently, even before he was in government. We went through 14 years of Oracy being denied any significance by the Conservative government. Mr. Gibb, who was the education minister who I met a few times, famously said, well, we don't want more chat at the back, do we? Right? And he also said, which is relevant to what I'll say a bit later, and I said, you know, about children coming in speaking various varieties of English. Why would anybody want to speak non-standard English? I was so taken aback that I didn't reply, which I should have done. So we're hoping that Labour is going to put that right. And that they will put Oracy into the school curriculum, which is now being reviewed. There is a conspiracy theory, of course, of why the Conservatives were so resistant to Oracy going into the curriculum, teaching young people how to speak confidently and effectively. And the conspiracy theory is because they only wanted their kids to know how to do that. Because if our kids found out, well, we might run the country. So I don't think it's true, but probably not. But it's interesting, isn't it? And some people don't go for it even now. Here's somebody who has said this in the Telegraph. Teaching kids Oracy is like teaching a tortoise how to make a coffee table. And teaching bright kids how to speak is pointless as well, because they're bright, so it comes naturally. Now, he's boasted quite a lot about failing his A-levels, Jeremy Clarkson. So I wonder if he thinks he's one of them. He might be, but he certainly is when it comes to Oracy. And it's just ridiculous that voices like that get as much space as people saying sensible things. It's like, you know, climate change. Oh, let's put this rogue scientist on who denies it all and balance it up against the sensible people. Anyway, there we are. So let's think about you. How many of you were actually taught how to use spoken language in school? How many? Right, you were. Yeah? Oh, yes, that's right. Was that part of the school or a separate thing? Oh, that was great. Yes, they're still going there. What kind of school did you go to? Did you? Right. Well, when I asked the PGCE students this question, there's usually, say there's 80 there, there's probably 10, 15 might put their hands up, and they'll all have gone to private schools, okay? And that's the only typical way you would get Oracy education is by going to a private school in Britain. And especially at some kinds of schools. And is it any surprise then that there are other good reasons, aren't there? But that so many of them end up in talking professions, being barristers, being politicians, being on the TV and stuff like that. And if you didn't, well, what did you have to do to learn how to do these things? I wasn't taught in any way how to do them. And so I've had to learn how to do these things for myself. Are these things you've all had to learn to do as well? Yeah? And they're vital, aren't they? I mean, I don't know about you like this one. One reason I volunteer to chair staff meetings is not because I'm a power freak, honestly. It's because I can't bear the way some people do it. And you waste so much time. And it's a skill. It's a real skill. And you can learn how. So this is what we want all young people to be able to do these things. And we know that, it's going to affect politics. Stephen Coleman, who's Professor of Political Communication at Sheffield, has said this is one of the things we must do, that we want more active participation by young people in politics. And that means they should have to develop these abilities. Confidence and clarity in self-expression. If you talk to people like Angela Rayner, who didn't go to public school, she learned it through the trade unions. David Blunkett through the trade unions. That was another way that people learned these sorts of things. How to engage in meetings, plan things, and how to express your ideas. And this is the sort of thing that again, is vital for the modern world. If you ask employers what do they want, then right back in 2010, they were saying this: skills in customer handling, oral communication. This is what they want. And they're saying school leaders haven't got it, And this is what they said in 2016. So everybody realizes it's important. And yet it's only just now it's starting to be seen as the sort of thing that we should be finding space for in schools. And one of the things that you'll be familiar with if you didn't go to private schools is what it's like to be a state school student and come to Cambridge. Okay, I have friends who got brilliant A-levels. I went to secondary school in the Lake District, grammar school, but not a private school. And I had friends who came here and dropped out because they just couldn't fit in. And I know other people who felt the same. And that was a long time ago, but we did some research I did it with Clara Perez-Adamson, on young people who come here to Cambridge from two kinds of school, basically. The elite public schools or comprehensives. And how were they finding it to fit in their first term as undergraduates in different subjects here in Cambridge? What did we find? Well, this person, Helen, who was from Hull, first person in her school ever to come to Cambridge, first person in her family to go to university, brilliant A-levels, right? And she came here, and this is what she said. In supervisions, I'll be asked something and kind of shut down almost, rather than trying to think, well, I do actually know something. I think I was just scared of what he, the tutor, was going to ask me. And she really felt she just couldn't cope. Well, she said, there's this lad from St. Paul's there, and the tutor asked him, and he said to me before he'd only half read the chapter, and he just talked about it for a bit, and the tutor said, that's really good. And you asked a guy like that from a public school, and he said, I think the school did a lot to prepare me for here. I was given mock interviews by various teachers, knew how to challenge me and get me thinking in a sort of Oxford fashion. It's just like the sixth form doing this. So this is the difference. And if we want to level up and actually have an equal number of state school students come to Cambridge as private school students, we've got to do more for this. And we're working now with the widening participation unit to actually help teachers in state schools prepare their kids more for coming to somewhere like Cambridge, but to any university really. So Oracy education, we're really talking about teaching kids how to talk and helping them learn about talk, okay? About how it works. And we do think that schools ought to explicitly teach young people how to use spoken language well. You teach them how to do maths, you teach them how to do PE, you should be teaching them how to speak and learn. Some teachers, for example, say they don't like group work because the students just waste their time. And I will say some more about group work in a minute, but one reason is they don't teach them how to work in groups. They don't say, I wanted them to do long division, but I put them there and they couldn't do it, so I'm giving up on long division. You think you've got to teach them, wouldn't you? And that's what we need to do with spoken language as well. And they need to learn how talk works. So let's say a bit about learning about talk. Some of the things they should learn are things that some of us learnt through hard experience. One is that regional varieties of English are not incorrect versions of the standard language. They have their own grammatical rules, and the same applies to accents. Everybody's got an accent. You can't lose your accent. You can just change it and have a different one. And some are historically linked to power and privilege. So if somebody speaks like Boris Johnson, it's because the world they've moved in, the environment they've been in through education is historically linked to power and privilege. While people who haven't lived in that environment will learn a different way of pronouncing English and a different variety. Now, if you want to change it, Joan Bakewell actually went to school not that far from where I went to school, but she decided when she was at Oxford in her second term to come out, as she said, of her college one morning speaking like all the others. And she dropped her northern accent to speak like she does now. Now, that's up to her. I made a decision a long time ago not to do that. I'm not sure it was entirely conscious, but it probably was. And that should be up to you if you want to change your accent. And I think they need to know that we can all change the kind of language we use to suit different social situations. It's okay to do so. It's not demeaning or wrong or false. And I just thought I'd say a little bit, if you forgive the self-indulgence, about me use myself as an example. As I say, I grew up in the Lake District. There I am in one of my leisure pursuits with some mates, or marras, as we call them, in the lakes. And I use some words only in that kind of situation. I say there's no like it. Or do you want out else from the bar? This is somewhat like the right kind of weather, isn't it? And that old lass next door says she's having trouble with the floods. It's only a little bit of water, but, you know, we'd better go and help her out. It's not that good, is it, isn't it? Now, I'd speak like that when I'm with them, and that's me. But when I'm here, that's me. Where am I? There. When I'm here, I don't speak like that. Okay. I use words I'd never use in those other informal situations. In the governing body, I would say one has to consider that there are different ways of looking at this problem, and I wish to offer a possible solution, but it's contingent upon us recognising certain factors. And my proposal is as follows. And in the end, we only have a dichotomous choice. Now, I wouldn't down the pub with these guys say, I'm afraid we only have a dichotomous choice of real ales here tonight. But that doesn't mean I'm being false in either situation. I'm just using talk to adapt to that different kind of social milieu and to the different company I'm keeping. And likewise, if I'm working with other psychologists or education people, I don't mind using quite a lot of jargon, which I'll avoid today, because with them, they all know what it means and it speeds things up. So that's what young people need to understand and be able to be helped to see that this is how it all works. What Oracy education doesn't mean, then, is encouraging people to lose their local accent. If they feel when they move around the country, or they want to, it's up to them. But you can't lose it, you'll just have to pick a new one. And they shouldn't be told that local dialects are ungrammatical. I've heard some teachers, I've read about some teachers in secondary schools in London saying when children come in speaking British Black English, which is very cool nowadays, some of the white children speak it, they're told they can't even speak it in the corridors. And because it's ungrammatical English, it's not. It's just it has its own grammar. And it's foolish to try and get students to speak standard English in all situations. Why should they? On the other hand, they need to realise if they go into some situations, it's what you should do. Because it will affect how you are treated. So they need to understand that you don't need to forget one way of language, one way of speaking to learn another. I've not forgotten how to speak in a Cumbrian English to work here at Hughes or to speak to you today. And we want to extend their speech repertoires, not diminish them, not say, stop using those bad words, stop saying those things. You say, in some situations, it's going to be better to use these others. And broaden your repertoire. If somebody like Boris Johnson can only speak in one way, that's his loss. If you can speak in two different ways to different people, you're more skilled linguistically than he is. and that the ability to adapt can be celebrated as an accomplishment. So this is what we're trying to push. And we've had, we've had resistance from the conservative side of things, in extreme form like Jeremy Clarkson saying it's a waste of time in schools doing this to most kids. On the other hand, we've also had recently attacks from what you might call a more left-wing perspective that's saying, what you're saying, working class kids need to change the way they speak. Yeah, that's terrible. You're just actually telling them that their form of language is wrong. I said, we're not saying that. We're saying they need to learn other ways to speak as well if they want to operate in a wider range of talk situations. And I'll just say something about two of the kinds of situations. I won't say anything about that, but the less obvious one of working in a team. Because I think that one's, as I say, less well recognised as being something to do with Oracy, when speaking in public is what everybody thinks Oracy education is about. You've all worked in teams, you've all been in meetings, you've done things with other people in different situations. How many of you are teachers or related to teaching? Oh, okay, quite a few of you. All right, for those ones, for you, if you were walking around your classroom and you overheard, you'd set some group work, kids in groups of 3, say, working together, and you stopped and said, now that's a good discussion going on. What would you be hearing and seeing that told you it was a good discussion? Okay. If you're not a teacher, imagine you've been in a meeting, like a staff meeting or some committee, and if you thought, wow, that was a really good discussion, what would be the features of it that told you it was good? Any suggestions, anybody? Yeah. 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 Yeah, so they'd be relating to each other in that way. Anything else? Yeah. Exactly, that's right. You'll be building on what has already been said. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So everybody ideally contributing, yeah? Anything else? Yeah. That's true. Yeah, I will say something exactly about that. Thank you very much. Anything else? Anything else? Yeah. That's true. If it's that kind of situation, you're right. Yeah. And anything else about a productive discussion that you think you could identify? Yeah. They would have questions for each other. They wouldn't just wonder. They would ask questions. Exactly. Yeah? Okay. Now, I'm doing a classic teacher's thing here. I'm trying to get you to give me the right answers. And I think you have, mainly. Because we know from the work we've done, mainly initially with groups of upper primary students, but also with secondary students who have done it with, and other people have done it with adults working in teams and groups, to creative teams, musicians rehearsing together. I did some research on. We know that if it's a good discussion, these things typically characterize it. Everybody participates, not just one person talking all the time. That they share relevant information. You don't just keep it to yourself. You say, I think this is important, I'll say this. This is one that nobody actually mentioned, but I think it's important. That is, if you're trying to reach some conclusion, you don't mind disagreeing, but you do it in a constructive way. You didn't just say, that's rubbish. You say, I'm not quite sure that's right because, we haven't thought of this. That's pretty important, I think, for a good discussion. That you can be critical, but in a constructive way. Another one, I think, that we found is that you give reasons for your views. So if you do think something's rubbish, you say, why? Or you think, we really ought to do this because, and you see lots of becauses coming. When we look at the transcripts, they're coming all over the place, which they're not in bad discussions. And exactly as somebody just said, you ask questions. You don't just sit there, what do you mean by that? You say, I'm not sure I understand. Can you explain a bit more what you mean by it? And another one, which is quite important, is this. My colleague Christine Howe from here at Cambridge, she did a lot of work with primary school children working in groups, and she got one lot of teachers to give them maths and science problems to work through in the classroom. and said, just get them to work in groups, and then we'll test them. We'll look at the answers they come up with, and we'll test them individually a bit later down in the term. The other classes, she said, get them to work together in groups on these, but tell them they've got to stand up at the end of the session and give the group answer for the question, right? What did you find when she went back? The ones who'd been asked to agree on an answer were the ones who got the best answers. And they were the ones who months later remembered better what they'd learned. And it's in real life, it's vital, that, isn't it? If you're a creative team working for Apple and they say design the new iPhone, you can't spend 4 weeks and say, oh, let's just agree to differ, you know. This stands to reason. It's important in lots of life, not just in school. So this is the kind of thing that we want children to be able to do. And as you've quite rightly pointed out, one way of thinking of this is that there are ground rules, implicit ways of operating that make a discussion good. And yet they're rarely brought out into the open. Every situation has ground rules. This has ground rules. For example, you knew what you were coming to, a talk about oracy. And you knew that the rules were, I would do nearly all the talking. You'd sit quietly there and not say much unless you were asked. If you use your mobile phone, you do it very discreetly. And you actually wait till the end before you ask a question. I didn't hand those ground rules out because you've all been here. We know from research done cross-culturally that people in the Amazon who've never been to a school or whatever, sit them in a situation like this, they wouldn't know how it operated. But we do because we've been through it. So there are good ground rules that make it work, which are essentially those, that you do those things. If it goes wrong, there are bad ground rules, which are these kind of things. And this is apparently, isn't it, one of the places with the cleverest people in the world here. And I've sat in some staff meetings in the university where people are using these rules, not the good ones, okay? So it doesn't go along with being clever, as Jeremy Clarkson says. It goes along with whether you want and know how to have a good discussion. And if you do these things, follow those implicit rules, might as well not bother. And that's when group work's a waste of time, and that's why teachers sometimes give up on it. So what we've done with teachers is get them to go through that process of raising awareness with their students, and then get them to agree a set of ground rules that they think would also create a good discussion. And I can tell you that it transforms the quality of group discussion in classrooms within a term. I can walk in a classroom, even with little kids, where it's been done and where it hasn't, and the difference is just so apparent. And we know from the research we've done here that you actually get better results as a result of doing that. It's not just they can talk better and work better together. They actually get better academic results in maths and science and English if you get them to do this. So it's a win-win, which is another reason why it really ought to be taken seriously. And they've got to learn by getting some chance to practice it doing sensible kind of activities. So anyway, what do students themselves say about oracy education? They say this. They say things like that it's helped them learn to stand up in front of a big group of people confidently when they wouldn't do it before. They've got courage to speak in all their classes. And here's one girl. We've done a particular thing on girls, women, learning with oracy. And because a head teacher of a big girls' school in London told me that she was finding even very able girls were very reluctant to speak out, even in classes that had no boys in them. And that she felt it was something that was still an oppressive part of the sort of culture for even girls who were confident in other ways. And so this is the sort of thing that she found really helped. And others just say, I've found my voice, which is great, isn't it? And that's what we really want to happen. So what we really need now is education policy which explicitly recognises oracy's importance, not what we've had in the last 14 years. And I'm going down to House of Lords a week on Monday because they're launching the Oracy Commission's report, which is setting out what they think should happen. And there's been a curriculum review set up, which will be looking at the whole curriculum, and hopefully this will be part of it. And we need all teachers to be trained to use and manage talk well for learning in their classrooms, as well as teaching their young students how to use it. We need to know that their oracy skills are really well developed. And we want to really teach them expressly how to communicate through talk. And as I said, we're working with Abby's here today. You meet her in the coffee. She works with the Widening Participation Unit and is also a member of the Oracy team. And we're actually working with them to try and make sure what I described about state school students coming to Cambridge and being overwhelmed by the Oracy demands of the university, that is something of the past. So that's it really. That's everything from me. But if you do want to know any more, there's our website. Or you can get in touch with me. If you just Google me, it'll come out. I'll come up quite easily. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask. We are going to have some tea and things where you can just talk, a bit more informally. But if anybody would like to ask either of us anything now, please do. Yeah, start here. Wait for the mic to come because we'd like to be able to hear you and to have it, recorded.
How do you scientifically measure oracy, and is the nation making any progress in oracy?
Yes, we do. If you Google the Oracy Skills Framework, you'll find that here at Cambridge we've come up with a framework for assessing oracy, which sets out all the various skills, none of which you'll need in every situation, but you would need in different ones. We have some sort of ways of assessing it, which are up on that site as well. I have to admit, it's difficult. It's a lot harder than assessing writing because it's so, hearing. And like if you were assessing me and you and somebody else working in a group, it might make a big difference to how well you contributed or how well I did. So it's very hard to do. But there is a lot of work going on it. A lot of people are spending serious time on it. And we're hoping that there will be some way that oracy can be assessed in some way within the education system effectively. Not least because if something's not assessed, people's progress isn't assessed, it tends to not be treated very seriously, does it? So that's a good reason. Yeah. And in terms of progress, there are lots more schools doing it now. It's really taken off in a big way. And in the world, we've had Japanese teachers, Norwegian teachers, Dubai, India, China. One of my colleagues, Pete Dudley in the centre, he was just over in China speaking. He said he was asked to talk to teachers who were training in China. I said, what was it like? He said, well, I walked in, there were 3,500 teachers. So his skills in talking were quite demand. So I think there is a lot more recognition of it happening now, at least. Yeah.
But are we making progress?
Yeah, we are. The projects we've been working with, we evaluate them. We know it works. We know. I always say what we do at Cambridge, typically in educational research, we don't sit in our ivory towers and conduct these clever experiments on teaching and learning and then tell teachers what to do. What we've typically gone out and done is go out in the world and find out what really good teachers do and then distill that down and see whether we can see evidence that why it works and what it is and then spread it, tell others. So that's what we've done with Oracy Education. We've seen there's some really good ways of making it work, and we now, as Benjamin knows, we actually are making those available to more and more teachers. Yeah? Okay. Somebody else? Yeah, at the back. Here's the mic coming. Oh, sorry, it's a very back person. Yeah. Hiya.
I'm sorry I arrived a bit late because I didn't hear the beginning of your talk.
No, sorry about
What I wanted to say to you was that I learned oracy because as a child I had a stammer. And my mother sent me to a speech therapist.
Yeah.
And the speech therapist got me involved in an amateur dramatic company. And then I became a barrister. So speech and oracy, terribly important, but you can start from even the most difficult beginnings.
That's
and
true.
pick it up as you go along.
Yeah, you're right. I think there are lots of ways into it other than being taught in school, and certainly drama lessons. Some of the people who are keenest on promoting oracy in schools are drama teachers because they know how important it is. Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah. The Bridget Phillips and the new Secretary of State for Education, if you look up her website, it says that she learnt in the same way by her mother sending her along to drama lessons, and that's how she gained confidence in that way. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Wait for Kerry to appear with the mic. Yeah, there.
I'm a geography teacher, secondary, and so the way geography is assessed is obviously by written,
Yeah.
or by students writing, is how much research has been done to look at how oracy will improve directly correlated to particular written skills?
There is some. One of my academic heroes, Douglas Barnes, said an awful long time ago that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. And what he meant by it was that that's the way in for lots of people to get them to appreciate how their written voice can be developed is through speaking initially. And certainly in subjects like geography, it's been found that if you can get... Another nice quote is from a guy called Jay Lemke, who's an American science educator, and he says, science education should make students fluent speakers of science. And he means that you should be able to talk about your subject and use it as a discourse for getting things done. We've actually written a book called Thinking Together in Geography with geography teachers, which if you look it up, it's there. You can get really cheap copies on Amazon. And that's about using it for geography. So we're really not saying it's just drama and English. We are saying it's as Benjamin was, it's part of those subjects, and it really can make a difference. The sort of difference we've seen, for example, is if you can get proper discussions going in classrooms involving all the students, not just the usual suspects, and you can get them to do it. One of the great things is that the teacher actually realises what the students haven't understood from the lesson, and that's equally as important as them giving them the right answer, because that way you know, well, I'll forget my next lesson. I know what I've got to do now. I've got to go through, something again. So I think it really is, there's quite a lot of research on that now. A lot of it to do with science, but there is some to do with geography, yeah.
So I'm about to start my PhD at the faculty.
Great.
I'm very excited. And I'm looking at the correlation between talk and writing, particularly in the English secondary classroom.
Yep.
And I started that with my master's last year. And what I kind of worked on and found that to have this like dialogic classroom,
yeah.
The two things I wanted to achieve was the teacher's role as a kind of guide rather than dominating or even conducting discussion. I wanted to give as much autonomy as possible to the students.
Yep.
And the other one was specifically English, was trying to equip them to be able to talk about their own personal experiences and share those unique approaches and outlooks that they had in the group discussions and seeing how that added to it all. And that took a long time.
Yeah.
Like with my A-levels, that took 2 years to cultivate that safe space and everything in order, and then they left. And that was, it was gone. And I wondered whether there was any strategies, any things that you guys have done that might work in order to help that process. So I've looked at the research and there's frameworks and there's approaches, but there's nothing specific that I wondered if I was really missing.
Specific for doing what exactly?
To help create that safe space, but in a way that isn't teachers just at the front pointing at hands. Like I've used the prompts, I've used the cards in tables. I've tried to give them as much free will as possible and give them those rules and approaches for exploratory talk. But it is, just whether there is something I'm missing.
You may be, I don't know. You can talk to us informally in a minute and we'll see. But I would have thought there's quite a lot to help with that. What age were you working with? A-level?
A-level.
Oh, right, yeah. Most of the stuff we've done has been more with younger children.
That's what I'm noticing.
And so there's less resource designed for that level, I have to say. But the same principles apply, but it is rather different. The thing you were saying about giving them space to talk. I mean, one of the things we found from the biggest study of classroom talk ever done in the world, which we did here just fairly recently. One of the things that we know that's really important from that and from other studies in secondary schools is it's that balance between the teacher being the expert informer and the guide who it's not a case of switching totally to that. You don't just want classroom discussion. It's a strategic balance between doing the sort of thing I've been doing where you're telling people something you hope they want to know and they need to know, and then balancing that with those other kind of activities in which are based on that body of knowledge and drawing that out. So that's the sort of thing that we know works. But as I say, mainly with younger students, I have to say. But we certainly have to talk about it. I'm glad to hear you doing it anyway. Great.
Yeah, hopefully, something positive comes out of it. But yeah, it is with the older students, trying not to make it seem babyish for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Striking that balance.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
I'm totally at the other end of my experience from you. I have been retired for well over 20 years, and I started my teaching in the days when Homerton was directed to teacher training, and that's what we did. We did education. And in those days also, Homerton was quite interested in the teaching of French in the primary schools. Now, French and other languages have moved in and out of favour, depending on governments and local authorities, and working in different sorts of institutions. But I certainly always feel that the learning of another language also is a way of tremendously of helping with oracy skills. Children are in groups, children are talking, children are valuing what each other says. And another thing that has happened since my days is that there are many more children in our schools now whose mother tongue is not English. And when you look back to the primary schools, it's not necessarily learning English skills, as you were discussing. It's often children who speak very fluently 2 or 3 languages. Mm-hmm. And because young people, travel and meet other people, and sometimes marriages happen, and children are now speaking a couple of languages easily, the same as happened in our own family. It just seems that the learning of another language and the interest that a child has in another language that they hear spoken, the children themselves are travelling, some of them, the luckier ones, the very fact that you hear other languages, that gives you an interest in culture and other people and what they do and what they eat. And I think this learning of another language or hearing of another language or being exposed to another language, particularly at a very early age, is a great help to oracy skills. And I do wonder whether that does make a case more for continuing learning another language or being exposed to another language early on when kids are very, very receptive. So I'd like to hear your comments about early language learning, foreign language learning in our schools. Yeah, well, we were asked to do a review of that very topic for the Welsh government that put oracy into the Welsh curriculum. And of course, it's a bilingual curriculum in Wales. And so they wanted to know about bilingualism and early bilingualism. And the research we found shows that one is that being bilingual gives you cognitive advantages. You've kind of got 2 toolkits for making sense of the world, not just one, and they do it in rather different ways, as you'll know if you speak another language, that it doesn't divide the world up in the same way. And likewise, that when you're below the age of 12, you can just learn languages without even trying. You just go in. After the age of 12, as you know, if you've done it as an adult, it's a conscious decision, and it's much harder to get it in there. So not only and they've also found that bilingual people score higher on tests of lateral thinking, because it gives you these different ways of making sense of the world, so as well as the cultural advantages. So it's a great shame in this country that language learning, because we all speak English and most of the world does, that it doesn't really get the interest as it should. But all the things there show that early bilingualism, as you said, is a very positive thing. And certainly parents shouldn't be thinking they should be not speaking the home language at home because they need to help the kid get on at school, they'll get picked school. They should be doing the opposite. They should be keeping that language going at home, because the child will then grow up bilingual. There's no way it'll do them any harm. So you're right, I agree. The research backs up what you said, basically. Yeah. Okay, that's it, I think. We ought to stop. And thanks for your attention. You obviously have the oracy skills of being good listeners, so thank you for doing that. And we're having a cup of tea now and everything. If you want to chat about it, please do. Okay, cheers.